So welcome to this joint webinar between HRA Global and Nourish Food Marketing. We work in conjunction with each other on quite a number of occasions, and we felt that it was a really good opportunity just to come together and really have a good discussion between Joanne and Hamish around kind of what's happening Europe, North America, where the similarities are, what the trends are that are kind of straddling the Atlantic, and where differences lie. So if we can move on to the next slide, thank you. So as I said, your speakers today are Joanne MacArthur, President of Nourish Food Marketing, and Hamish Renton, Managing Director of HRA Global. My name is Ros Algar. I also work at HRA Global, and I'm just really here to facilitate. So quick overview of what the agenda will be. Brief introduction to HRA and Nourish for those who don't know us, but obviously there's always websites, so you can always find out more as and when. And then we're looking at 6 different trends and really comparisons, similarities and differences across the Atlantic. So the first being around precision marketing, Ozempic effect, the kind of the plant-based scenarios, sustainable food production, authenticity, halal foods, and alcohol moderation in the mainstream. So all of those are key areas and key topics that we as organizations are helping our clients with, and we really felt that they were things that needed kind of discussion and exploration. We've also hopefully got time for a Q&A at the end. And as all of you I know will know, there's always a kind of a Q&A button down the bottom on your Zoom. So if you want to ask anything, please pop it in as it comes up, and we will get to that at the end. So just a brief bit about HRA Global for anyone who doesn't know us. So we are based in the UK. Sorry, thank you. We've been going for over 13 years, and we work solely with the food and drink industry, helping to support private equity, food and drink brands and manufacturers. We work across a wide range of different services, really helping businesses to understand their market, their consumers, and really help them to kind of develop and sustain growth. So we're incredibly well networked within the industry, which means that we, you know, if we have a conundrum, if we have a question, we know how to tap into the answer pretty quickly. And we have delivered over 200 projects in 30 different countries, for a wide range of organizations. Alongside that, more generally, we also have our own consumer panel called the Taste Collective. So UK-based, over 3,500 consumers who are signed up to us because they want to help and have opinions on the food and drink industry. So we do regular monitoring for them. Our clients quite often come in and ask a range of questions on our ongoing quantitative surveys, but we'll do focus groups, taste testing, and those we moderate the group on a regular basis to make sure that we really do have a high quality of respondents at our fingertips ready to go. So now I'll quickly hand over to Joanne, so you can talk Nourish, and then over to you, Joe, to carry on with the first topic.
Great, thanks, Roz. So like HRA, we are also a specialized agency in food and beverage. We've been around for 15 years. We work across North America and also globally. Our head office is in Toronto, Canada. And we like to say, because we know a lot about a little, you know, we work on an annual trend report, which is our gift back to the industry. It's free of charge, and I am just trying to move these, and for some reason I am not able to change. So if somebody can change to the next one, there we go. So this is the cover of our 8th annual trend report. And because we work across the whole food ecosystem, we're able to connect dots that others may not see. Like HRA, we do a lot of, we seem to have a bit of a lag, but we're getting there. We do a lot of original research. We have a lot of in-house databases as well. And so today what we're doing is we're highlighting how, you know, some of those trends that we've talked about are playing out on both sides of the Atlantic. So the first trend we want to talk about is precise nutrition, or we also call that precision, personalized nutrition. And what we're seeing is that this is taking a giant leap forward with AI. Wearables are now giving consumers confidence in what their bodies need right now by tracking not just heart rates, but also glucose levels. We've seen consumers in the past wearing these continuous glucose monitors through, and these are non-diabetics, people who just want to see how they react to certain foods. There are programs like Levels, NutriSense, that give you real-time data in terms of how your body's reacting to certain foods. But interestingly, there's a new app that I've been playing with and works quite well called January. It's free to download. And it uses AI, so you don't even need a continuous glucose monitor. And it does a great job of, you take a picture of your food, it analyzes it, and it predicts how your body is going to metabolize that and the impact on your blood sugar. So it's really taking the place of those continuous glucose monitors. So it's pretty good. Play around with it if you get the chance. We're also seeing the younger generation going back to dieting at record rates. If we can just go back, there we go. What we're seeing is consumers in that 18 to 34 years of age, 66% of them are now dieting. That's up from 52% just 2 years ago. Why is that? Well, I believe it's the impact of social media and the emphasis on appearance that comes with that. So in the future, aided by AI, we're going to get personalized eating recommendations based not just on how our bodies are reacting to things, our DNA, but also our microbiome. And I think, if we look back to 2024 in 10 years, we're going to think it was crazy that we thought there was one way of eating that worked for everybody. And what we're finding out through the science is that it's really our microbiome that truly differentiates us, even more than our DNA. And, gut health affects more than just digestion. And consumers are also cluing in on that. It affects brain health, lungs. And so checking our gut microbiomes and getting food recommendations to optimize the health of it is going to become, we believe, mainstream going forward. And this is interesting. This is out of the UK, Withings. They unveiled a urine analysis device called UScan in 2023. And it sits on the toilet bowl. It doesn't cost a lot. I think it's about $400 US. And it assesses more than 3,000 metabolic biomarkers via urine, one of the gold standards, excuse the pun, of health assessment. It's in beta, but it expects to launch later this year. And we've always thought that, grocery and farm is on the cusp of really integrating health and food shopping. Beyond traditional drugstores in North America having pharmacists, a lot of them also have nutritionists on staff or dietitians. And we've seen these standalone products like Noam and Viome that I just showed you already exist. But the barrier to grocery testing and coming up with personalized recommendations for consumers and how they shop in store is falling fast. And we see in the UK, we've been following Holland & Barrett. They've introduced genetic testing at their UK flagship store in London. And so you get on the spot genetic testing through a swab in your cheek, and then they diagnose the results. They upload it to something called a DNA bean with an app, and it allows users to scan barcodes as they're shopping and see what the best products are for them. On this side of the Atlantic, Costco US just announced the expansion of its partnership with a healthcare provider called Sesame. And what they're going to be doing is offering weight loss program for their members with an initial 3-month subscription of only $175 US. So the members who opt in for this, they get 3 months of clinical consultation, live video, clinician of their choice, They get nutritional recommendations, and it's also rumored that they will also get access to those new class of GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic, which we will be talking about in our next trend. But if you think about it, this could really be the ultimate shopper loyalty program.
Thanks, Joe. So I think we're seeing that. We're not seeing that trend amped up quite as much as some of those players you've talked about, because obviously the sort of tradition of medicine over here in healthcare is a bit more socialized than the North American model. So there's a bit more latent reliance on the state to take care of health needs. But that's changing. I think as people realize sort of practically that the state literally cannot deliver that, there's a bit of a transference of responsibility, and in steps the wearable providers, the precision nutrition companies, and if you like the apps. So some of the big trends we're seeing is really where kind of personalized data is wired into the either food choice or activity choice. So obviously fitness apps are very popular. I think we're a year or two behind the adoption levels of North America, but certainly wearables and trackers are very, there tends to be a 6-month lag in the tech being rolled out over here, so it's not a massive gap, and the adoption rates are similar. We have had a phenomenon of the Zoe app. So the Zoe it started off life as a university study into gut biome and was designed as a very open source study. So they literally wanted hundreds of thousands of people in that. And then gradually what it's become is an opt-in study. So rather than an academic study that was sort of hot-housed and you were invited in and remunerated, or you were given your data as a reward for participating, people pay to come in. So I think it's about £300 to come in, and then there's a monthly subscription. And for that, you have a battery of tests, everything from sort of gut biome to blood glucose measurements to standard blood tests. And then you get a degree of personalization within a format and within a sort of template that you're allowed to play with. So Zoe has become very an interesting property, a very hot property, and interestingly enough, has started spawning food products. So it's got a tie-up with Marks and Spencer's, for instance, and where they market a very high-end gut health shot as well. So Zoe's quite an interesting model. It's not clear that it's commercially a success, but I think as a phenomenon of sort of citizen science, if we can call it that, where you're empowering people to take ownership of their own data, their own biology ultimately, I think it's a roaring success. We are seeing also personalization of vitamins. So we're seeing sort of stacks of vitamins. So because we know from DNA data that people's use of trace minerals, for instance, or even just core vitamins B, B12, E, varies really quite significantly across the population. So most of the sort of RDAs, the recommended daily amounts on your vitamin tablets, aren't right. In fact, that's probably the one thing you can guarantee about that label is it's wrong, and wrong for you, because there isn't really an average as such, and the variance that we've got is significantly wider. So people are then leaping from the DNA test result to say, well, look, I need more vitamin E than the average person. So, and I think ultimately where it falls down is, what does that mean then? Should I take 1.5 tablets and snap it in half, or should I take 2 tablets because 1 tablet is the standard amount? And hence that's where personalized vitamins comes in, where you can literally get your precise amount kind of calibrated. But of course, that's done from DNA, not from biology either. So it's sort of, you're likely to want more. You've got a 50% chance of wanting more, rather than you definitely need 50% more. So I think what we're waiting for over here is, if you like, the DNA tests and the actual biology to meet the precision nutrition. So you're likely from the DNA test to need more, and then the biology says, well, actually you're low on vitamin D. Great, I'm likely to need more. I'm low, hence I do need more, and this is how much. And this person here is giving me a vitamin, and you'll pay a nice premium, I'm sure, to receive those minerals and vitamins through the post. That's really good. And of course, it's all enabled by sort of 3D printing and a lot of the tech that we're seeing. So I think that's a really interesting solution. And again, I think is one to watch.
Thanks, Hamish. So when we came out with this Ozempic effect trend back in November when we released our trend report. I think this is the one most people kind of raised an eyebrow at, thought we were kind of out of left field. But since that time, it's definitely the one that everybody wants to talk about the most. And so, you know, the way we look at it, this class of GLP-1 weight loss drugs like Ozempic, they really signal a mind shift in how society thinks about obesity. And it's now being seen as a chronic medical condition to be cured. We're going to see the price, the form of these drugs come down as more companies supply them. And so that's going to increase access for the masses. We don't have great numbers on how many people are using it. Latest thing I saw is 5%, but we expect that's going to be going up quickly. And it really brings to mind those of us who've been in this business long enough. If you recall, like 15 years ago, I remember people talking about gluten-free being a fad. And now it's mainstream. So we could be looking at the same phenomenon here. And we also, in North America, we continue to have record high obesity rates. 73% are overweight or obese. And so there is sizable demand for this product. And we think that widespread adoption of this could lead to an unprecedented shift in the quality and quantity of what we eat. And, you know, are they really forever meds? I think originally that was what people thought, but I think we're also seeing, you know, popularized by Oprah Winfrey, a big celebrity over here. You know, she talks about how she goes on them to change her habits and then comes off of them just to try to stop that yo-yo dieting effect. So, you know, if that's the case as well, there's another opportunity for food products to support consumers as they cycle through these drugs. And, you know, people who are on these drugs, they are going to look for getting more functional value out of less food. So they're going to really optimize quality of calories over quantity. They're going to really want to preserve muscle mass while they're losing that weight. And so highlighting nutritional information like protein, fiber, other nutrients, that's going to be really important for food and beverage manufacturers. You should also consider offering, you know, packaging, smaller packaging sizes to allow for more portion control. I think frozen food has a big opportunity here as well. And of course, don't forget that even if only one member of your family is on this drug, it affects the whole family. That behavior rubs off. It rubs off in social circles as well. Anybody who's lived with somebody who's dieting knows that. And then the other interesting thing is we're seeing a connection between plant-based food and GLP-1. So for people who don't want to take these weight loss drugs, there are also some GLP-1 boosting foods. And if you want to see that in action, just go on TikTok and check out Ozempic. I dare you. You'll see it trending right now. And so consumers are trying to trigger that GL1 production. So, you know, there's a possibility that even calling out GLP-1 friendly foods could be that new keto friendly that we've been seeing on this side of the pond as well. But of course, you know, indulgence has a role in any diet. And, you know, if you sell an indulgent snack, can you reposition it as a little luxury or a tiny treat? We also see that trending on TikTok as well.
Yeah, so we see that. We don't see it with the media obsession that I think you guys in North America have, but clearly we see that in some of the numbers. These are authorized meds now for many of the health services of Europe. So they, you know, and whilst they're used off label, i.e. they are, you know, in the main diabetes meds that have been repurposed for weight loss benefits, and you can source these on the grey market. Whether you're advised to is another question, but you can. We are seeing that quality shift in calories because a couple of things. The meds themselves suppress the pleasure that you will derive from food. Not only they will suppress your appetite, they'll also make and boost your satiety, i.e. you feel fuller for longer. When you do it, you don't derive as much pleasure from it. So that means that there's this quality shift effectively. You have smaller portions and you need a bigger taste bang for your buck. You need products that sparkle and pop more than their equivalents. And I know certainly Nestle in Switzerland have a whole team working on reformulating their products to deliver to this market. So smaller portions, higher taste profile, almost as if you would engineer for the geriatric market, whereas we know taste buds degrade over time, and also for the agnostic market in terms of people who've got anosmia, they lose the function of their taste buds. So you have to over-engineer some of the sensory delivery of these products. So really interesting quality shift, a nutrition shift as well, because obviously if people are eating less, what they eat really matters, because they need to eat to feed themselves as opposed to eat to a feeling of hunger. So they're eating less, those calories really need to hit all the macronutrients, particularly protein, because one of the big issues of folk on these meds is they tend to lose total mass, sure, but they lose protein along with the fat. So they end up as smaller versions of themselves, as opposed to just losing the fat. So they don't end up with a six-pack at the end of it, they just shrink. So therefore, you need to focus on the protein as well. Some of the challenges effectively around these meds are cost. Clearly, in the States, for instance, they're extremely expensive, and in Europe they're sort of moderately so. You're talking in the couple of £100 a month to be on these meds. So it isn't so much more than a very fancy diet club, which might be costing you almost that amount. So they're a bit more accessible, relatively speaking. But there are safety concerns because people are effectively self-prescribing or sourcing from the grey market and just having a bash because they saw something in the papers or their friends are. So there are issues, particularly around kind of thyroid and a few other issues around pancreatitis as well. So I think, what does that mean for the food industry then? Well, look, you've got natural alternatives. We were talking about those earlier just with Joe, but anything that can boost that naturally is clearly going to have that impact. All the media discussion about it just stokes a sort of self-referential churn of interest, and brands can work off that. And I think to do that, you'd need to think about those smaller portions, higher taste, more pop and sparkle on the plate. And then, of course, the point I would make is these aren't going away. In fact, semaglutide is a bit old hat, in fact, because the action's moved on to tirzepatide, which is sort of Gen 3 of these drugs, whose efficacy is 40% higher than semaglutide. So if you can get your hands on that, it gives you less side effects and a greater effect, and you can effectively, aspire to lose more weight again. So I think that's really interesting. And the last thing I'll leave with you, and I know we're going to come on to this topic a bit later, is it's actually a treatment for AUD, alcohol use disorder, because of that mechanic whereby it suppresses the pleasure you get from food and drink. Guess what? If you have a drink, a beer, a wine, or whatever, that your brain doesn't get that as much of that reward as it would normally get when you're off the meds. Therefore, it's used to break those chains of addiction, that sort of compulsive behavior. So it's a very promising therapy in its own right, and is getting used over in Europe in those contexts, in kind of placebo-controlled, double-blinded trials with AUD. And it's also getting used for some cardio research studies as well. Because of its suppression of blood glucose, it's actually giving people a better control of their blood sugar, which is giving them slightly better cardiovascular health outcomes as well. So it appears to be a drug with different benefits that are sort of wider than just weight loss, and some challenges too. So it's not a one-way ticket, but there are other elements. So if we look at plant-based, if you look from over here, we've had it really has been a rocket ship on a plant-based. There's a lot of hot cash in the States, particularly a lot of venture capital cash into kind of plant-based. We've seen the market zoom up to around about $1 billion in the UK, for instance, and then really come off a little bit. And I think to write that market off, I think is very presumptuous. And in fact, I've had my own little journey where I've come. I'm actually looking forward to what sort of plant-based 2.0 will represent. So I think the key drivers aren't going to go away, are they? Because if your key drivers are health, taste, and environment, well, you're in for a very long ride indeed. So I think what's fueling plant-based is some really solid kind of drivers. But the big pushback, and we saw this so much in Gen 1 of plant-based, was this thing looks like a chemistry set, ultra-processed food. Call it what you will. It has sort of 96 ingredients and the consistency and mouthfeel of cardboard, but it would have these characteristics of ticking the box. So it wasn't too dissimilar from the very early gluten-free, wheat-free products that we saw. It took a couple of generations before they took on fairly ordinary sensory characteristics, and in some cases went beyond that. So plant-based for me is a keeper, and we're seeing that in kind of dairy alternatives as well. I think oat milk is a keeper. I think oat milk, for instance, makes a fantastic coffee and will be an enduring feature. And I think coconut too. Although if you look at sort of soy sales and rice and some of the other fractions, they haven't really moved much. So, and of course, the point is, if Gen Zs are getting into this, and to a certain extent millennials, they're going to move to the farm, through the chain. They're going to be having the families. They soon will be the empty nesters. So I think it's very important what happens here. It can be overestimated, but it is going to give you a pivot in how this market develops. We've seen flexitarians, so people are less dogmatic, and I know that's been mirrored on the other side of the Atlantic. People are more polygamous, if you like, and it's less the meat-free Mondays. It's just a smaller portions, and we'll switch and just play more. We've definitely seen that clean label. So the whole market's moved towards kind of natural, more kind of whole foods. Certainly in terms of what people ask for, if that's what they choose on the shelf, it's often different, but that's certainly what they articulate. And those sort of benefit, where a plant-based has got a real benefit that can be easily understood, such as the creaminess of oats, for instance. It's a simple win. And you are now getting sort of best of both hybridized production products that are out there. So there's kind of Kerry have got an oat and dairy range. People are doing half and half on meat, trying to triangulate sort of health, taste, sustainability, and trying to find some white space in that. And if we look kind of further out, there are many conflicting plant-based trends within Europe, because each country tends to have its own sort of core cereal crop, its sort of national dish, if you like, and that spawns a sort of stream of products. So we're yet to see the real winners in that. Will it be pea? Will it be lentil? For instance, what we're seeing is a sort of a maelstrom of all those coming together. But I would say in there, like I said earlier, I think oat is carving out that enduring niche for me.
Yeah, and of course, Hamish, you've led on plant-based. I think the UK has led North America on plant-based until, the tech bros got involved and we got our Beyond Meat and our Impossible Burgers. But consumers are naturally becoming less carnivorous due to climate change, animal welfare concerns, and we've seen high inflation, of course, around proteins really accelerate that reduction. But the one thing that the consumers are not willing to compromise on is taste. And so what we're seeing is the faux meat category is faltering right now, with the movement away from these ultra-processed chemistry set products that you mentioned, to embrace what's really best about the plant rather than trying to mimic meat. And it's interesting, in North America, you mentioned the younger consumers. In North America, campuses are vegetarian by default in a lot of cases. So we're seeing a real change in terms of dairy and meat offerings as well. And our annual trend report, we started covering plant-based and its evolution since our first trend report in 2017. And what we've seen over that time is a real change from some of the early plant-based, what I call plant-forward, really evolve into these highly processed faux meat substitutes that really have been fueled by tech funders and venture capital. So I thought it was only fitting to take that Gartner's tech hype cycle and really use it to explain what's happening in this marketplace. So, we moved from, that technology trigger innovation introduction, where people were interested in trying, they were curious, and then we got into that trough of disillusionment after that initial hype subsided. So I think that now, hopefully, we're going to start going up the slope of enlightenment, and we'll see a rebirth with more products putting that plant back into plant-based and really talking about what's best about the plant. And we're starting already to see a consolidation within the marketplace, both in fresh and with frozen, because the products are expensive. In a lot of cases, they're more expensive than what they're replacing, and they're more disappointing in terms of taste than the real thing, and certainly in terms of ingredient list as well. So we're really starting to see a consolidation of products, and it's not just in faux meat. We're also seeing consolidation in those dairy substitutes as well. Danone's just announced that they're discontinuing a couple of options under their Silk and So Delicious brands. And so we think moving forward, again, we're going to celebrate what's best about the plant rather than what it's replacing. We're going to continue to see those shorter, simplified ingredient lists. Processed food is processed food regardless of what it is. It's interesting. A lot of the great cuisine in the world is plant-based by default. And if you look at China, they've spent millennia on all sorts of opportunities around soybean and different products there. And yet within North America, we've seen very few of those products. So we think that, we've barely scratched the surface on some of those real basic plant-based proteins rather than, recreating something. And we also think that, we're starting to see a rise in algae to add protein and texture to some of those products as well. So, if you've got a product in this category, can you reposition it to talk about what's best about it in culinary terms rather than what it's mimicking or replacing? Can you clean up those decks so that there's less ingredients and consumers don't view them with suspicion? And I think even more importantly, can we put some of the joy back in eating plant-forward foods? I think, as I mentioned, some of the great world cuisines are flavorful and plant-forward. And, food technology, yes, we need it. We need it for sustainability reasons. But the language of tech is not the language of gastronomy. So we shouldn't really confuse the two.
Perfect. So let's turn to sustainability, and we can't have a trend webinar without acknowledging this one. So you knew this one was coming. So there's three things clearly that the food chain can do. It can address its primary packaging and its secondary packaging. It can have responsibility for its own enterprise, for its upstream raw material goods purchases, and for its downstream selling. And also it can, it needs reliable and simple ways of communicating what good looks like without sort of claim and counterclaim and skepticism. And they for me are the real three things that an enterprise can do. And consumers want companies to do this, but they also want other more nuanced things. So this is quite an area where kind of nuance varies by category for me, and consumer expectation varies by food category, as well as these sort of big broad brush themes. And we do know when they have opportunity and choice, and you've removed, if you like, a price barrier, they will, or everything else being equal, opt for the more sustainable option, which is fine. It would be logical for them to do that. And of course, it's very difficult, though, particularly over in Europe and the UK. Difficult to do that through a cost of living crisis, where there's a war in the East, and there's an inflationary surge, and there's all sorts of problems into it, and you know the list. So it's difficult to do that because people quite rightly said, well, look, my primary concern is me and my family and making it through this storm to the other side. If as I go through this storm, I can make some good choices or better choices, more like, then I'd be great to do that. But you time and time again, you speak to shoppers and they say, I'd love to, but, and then they have these sort of big buts that I've just described. And as a result, kind of one of the big areas that's getting focused on is food waste, because food waste ticks the cost control button and it kicks, if you like, the recyclability button as well. So that's an area that a lot of firms are focusing on. So, the other trend here is kind of, what I'm calling adventure, really. So after the pandemic, I don't want to go into the whole whys and wherefores, but clearly there was a suppression of sensory, social, culinary experience, and then a rebound, really. So that hot housed and fast forwarded, I think, a lot of customers' appetite for innovation and adventure, really. So out of home has got more exciting, more flavoursome, more cultures, more kind of culinary diversity, both in kind of portion size, portions, proteins, plates, environment, lighting, merchandising within the quick serve environment or the restaurant environment, and also in home as well. So more of a demand for kind of take home, replicating that in outlet experience. I think, what used to be kind of very fancy, very exotic, and therefore kind of a bit premium is now, frankly, very mainstream and very ordinary. And people are a little bit bored of the obvious candidates for culinary innovation. So sort of Chinese food, Indian food, for instance, within the Eurozone they're big staples, they're huge cuisines, where the interest has gone in sort of Korean and Thai and Malaysian, rather than just kind of Chinese equals Asian. So there's been an unpacking of sort of cuisines and a nuancing of cuisines and regions, which I think personally is really healthy, because a lot of these cuisines that have been overlooked in favour of some have got a lot to offer. So this adventure, this sort of kind of culinary tourism is playing out on plates and dishes. And the hot ticket at the moment is Mexican. Now that might be quite dull for a North American audience, because for you it's all sort of Chinese or Indian cuisine. You've sort of grown up with it. But for us it's relatively niche. It's been probably number 8, number 9 on a very long list, and a long way behind the top 2. But it's really coming up because of the adaptability of ingredients, the ability to make it vegetarian or vegan very, very easily, and the enduring, the attraction of the hot spices and the guacamole and the different breads and the whole kind of textural fireball that it can create when it's done well. So Mexican is a really hot ticket right now. And then kind of the counterbalance to that is a more kind of homespun, local focus on sort of rural, a notion of rural and non-urban and retro, really. Retro's always in whatever subcategory, from sort of motorbikes to bikes to whatever. Everyone loves a bit of retro because it tickles our nostalgic bone that we have as a species. But these really bring us familiarity, and they bring us comfort, and they bring us nourishment. That's why we like them, because it harks back very often to a sort of golden age or a yesteryear that never really existed, but we're comforted by it at a sort of soul level. So a lot of consumers find dishes and ingredients that have that sort of provenance, things they've grown up with, really appealing, sort of forgotten, overlooked, things that your mother would have or your grandmother would have. Those ingredients are making a comeback. And then, but with a twist very often. It's either highly provenance, they're from a specific town or a specific county or state, or they're made in a very ethical way. So it's not just rhubarb, it's forced rhubarb, i.e. grown in the dark in a particular triangle of Yorkshire. And that's where the money is, So you're getting that sort of nuance because it takes you back. Rhubarb was something you had as a kid, etc., etc. And now it's got this twist, and now it's from this defined sort of destination. And they really attract very, very high premiums indeed. And then the whole notion of natural food again, needs no introduction. That is really tickling the whole foods equals natural equals healthy equation, continues to purr along very nicely, and seems fairly impervious to cost control. Because of course, if you are cooking from scratch with natural ingredients, typically you're not paying processed food prices. So again, that if you can cook and you can use those ingredients, it is an enduring part of the market.
So I mentioned that sustainability had taken a bit of a backseat in North America to food availability or food affordability in the short term, but it's still important, and it's going to, come back with a vengeance, we believe. And what we counsel our clients over here is this notion of radical transparency, show versus just tell consumers. And, some great examples here, Seatails, they sell seafood with a story. They have QR codes on their tinned seafood products. And so you can see actually where that product came from, who the fisher was that caught it. So, you're getting full transparency, sea to plate. The other one I want to point out is from Australia, Honest Eggs. So, it's one thing to say that you have hens who are free range. It's another one to actually give them a Strava account and show their steps in real time. And the other thing, people are always worried about, perfection, but consumers don't expect perfection. Better to pull back the curtain and, share with them the journey that you're on. It's about progress rather than perfection. We're all learning as we go along. Definitions still, are being, are changing. Science, continues to learn. So it's really about, owning it, owning your journey and sharing it. And so I give the example of Oatly, the leading oat milk out there. This version of radical transparency. So they actually have this website where they show a timeline of all their missteps, and they've made it fun, right? So, they're owning the fact that, hey, we're all working on this together. It's not going to be a straight line, but we're making progress. And I think consumers are very accepting of that. Another thing that we've seen is a stunning loss of diversity in our food system, as well as our own microbiomes. We now have 3 species, rice, maize, and wheat, that make up almost 60% of the human diet. And so, with climate change, we really need to future-proof our food system and introduce more of these niche or heritage crops. And we saw the WWF and Unilever partner in this initiative called Future 50 Foods. And it's really promoting these sustainable food sources based on their nutrition, based on their environmental sustainability, as a way to future-proof our food system. And I think, to really bring this to life, one of the crops on their list is quinoa. And certainly quinoa was unknown 20 years ago, but today in North America, it is a kitchen staple. It's faster and easier to use than rice. And we are even seeing North American farmers now being able to grow quinoa to meet local demand. So this could be a blueprint that we could follow for some of these future crops. But of course, it's not enough for a farmer to grow this and to make the decision to grow a new heirloom crop. They also need a food system where all the players are cooperating. You need somebody to provide the right seeds. You need somebody who knows how to process them. You need chefs who are eager to work with them and tap into it and create dishes, as well as food manufacturers and retailers who are willing to sell them. We're also seeing increased competition for water and widespread shortages in North America, and that's only going to increase. It's predicted if we keep going the way we're going, we will fall 40% short of our global water needs by 2030. It's not that far off. And where's most of that water going? Well, primarily into food production. Agriculture is the world's most water-intensive industry. It accounts for 70% of all fresh water withdrawals annually. And we've seen marketers over here try to create meaning around terms like regenerative agriculture, no-till soil management, and it hasn't resonated with consumers. They don't understand what it means. And in fact, I don't think we understand what it means because there's not one agreed definition. But one thing consumers do understand is water. It's the source of all life. And so for that reason, we're seeing recycling of water is rapidly becoming more of a consumer hot button than even recycling plastics. It's actually moved into globally into consumers' top 3 environmental concerns, and it has overtaken plastic pollution. And so very important to keep an eye on that. We have also seen in the past 4 years a 40% annual increase in the number of food and beverage products making some kind of water usage claim. So for those reasons, we think that the stewardship of water could be the next resource battleground in North America. I've got this example of Kazoo Snacks, their water-saving tortilla chips. It just won a Good Housekeeping 2023 Sustainable Innovation Award. And it uses 40% upcycled corn germ and reduces water footprint by at least 16 gallons per 11-ounce bag compared to 100% new growth corn. So something to keep your eye on for sure. Our next trend is halal food. And what we're seeing in North America is a lot of CPG companies are focused on multicultural, but when they think multicultural, they celebrate things like Chinese New Year and support, Chinese North Americans, but they often ignore one of the biggest and fastest growing market segments, which is the Muslim population. It has now exceeded the Chinese ethnic market, but it's still not getting the attention that it deserves. So we saw that here. And so since 2014, Nourish, we've actually been conducting a Canadian halal shopper study to try to fill in the gaps of knowledge and come up with those actionable insights for companies who want to spend against their multicultural clients. And it's become really the go-to resource for the Muslim community as well as the government. And what we're seeing in the data is that there are still a lot of unmet needs and significant opportunities in a number of categories, from skincare to baby food. And what we always say is don't assume. A lot of people assume that things are considered halal by default, but you can see in that chart that that's just not the case. The other thing that we're seeing is that, yes, halal certification is very important, but we're seeing an uptick in trust in organic. And, more Muslims are starting to go beyond just the point of slaughter when they make their protein choices. And they're looking at how those animals were treated in life as well. So it's about a good life as well as a good death. And because of that, we're also seeing non-Muslims start to gravitate towards some of these definitions as well. As I mentioned, there's still a lot of room for improvement here, with halal shoppers thinking that only 51% of grocery food chains and 50% of those major food companies are actually doing a good job meeting their needs.
Yeah, we're seeing that over here as well. I mean, you've got, particularly given the patterns of migration into Western Europe in particular, and that we're still seeing, certainly in the UK, you've got that population broadly identifying as halal-based shoppers, rising from 4 to 13 million, which is a huge move, really. Half of all UK Muslims are under 25, so you can see that working its way through the demographic system, and that's driving primarily convenience demand for halal food. So, and if you were to go to any particular street market, you would see a lot of those products, in fact, are halal products, and you see people from all ethnicities merrily visiting those stores and buying them. So I think you've got a couple of things that are underpinning that growth. you've got that, the emergence of a Muslim middle class in big numbers now, spending money, big money on food that's creating that demand. You're now getting certification is getting its act together as well. So the different marks are coalescing. You've got the big companies getting interested in this market, everything from soft drinks all the way through to convenience, to biscuits, to cakes, etc. And there's kind of increasing acceptance that actually, as you were saying, Joe, that halal is a certification that means something outside of that ethnicity. So it's actually a mark of quality, a different take on quality than, say, an organic standard or a fair trade standard, but as valid in its own way, and certainly on a par with. So you also have that other fact that in quite a lot of the food industry, especially in startup land as well, a lot of Muslims are actually those owner managers, those entrepreneurs having a bash at starting a food business. And having big ideas too. So, and whilst we know, that the stats are sort of 1 in 10 companies make it through to maturity, the fact that there's so many entrepreneurs, from if you like a halal friendly base, means that the companies that go to the future will have halal at their core as well. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic, and I think it's under-egged in Western Europe as a whole, certainly.
Great. Our last trend is alcohol moderation mainstreaming. So what we've seen are Generation Z and millennials are distancing themselves from their boozy boomer parents. They're drinking less, and they're really embracing this sober curious movement. And sobriety is now seen as hip, especially in a time of legal cannabis over here, as well as social media that never forgets, right? So the times, they are a-changing. And we've seen alcohol has even gone out of style on the music charts. There's been a significant decline in chart-topping songs that reference being drunk. And we're seeing a continued rise in non-alcoholic beverage consumption, as well as an emergence of a lower alcohol segment as consumers seek ways to reduce their alcohol consumption without compromising taste. And every time I say this, somebody sends me some products, but I'm going to say it again. I think beer has done a great job. There are some great products out there that you would not know the difference, whether it's alcoholic or non-alcoholic. But I have yet to try a wine or a liquor that delivers the same. And I do think that, those few points of alcohol may help those products as well. And certainly in North America, we've had something, I call the Robert Parker effect. He was a really influential wine critic. He liked really overjuiced Cabernets, full-bodied reds, and everybody chased his approval. And what we've seen over time is the alcohol content of wine has gone up from 12% to 16%. Over a few decades. And that's, quite a lot. That's the equivalent of a couple of glasses of wine in a bottle. And so we think we may start to see what we call a reverse Robert Parker effect, where vintners start to bring down and have almost a light version of their products as a way of kind of bridging that gap between no and full strength. The other thing we're seeing is the rise of the flexitarian drinker. Hamish, you talked about the flexitarian protein consumer, but we're seeing the same thing in drinks. So in Whole Foods, US Athletic Brewing, which is a non-alcohol beer, and if you haven't tried it, it totally delivers. It now sells more than any other beer, including the ones with alcohol. And the other interesting thing is when you look at the sales data in Whole Foods, people aren't buying athletic instead of beer. They're buying it in addition to beer in their basket. So it's really creating a whole new drinking occasion. And of course, several countries, we're watching what's happening in Europe. They're starting to introduce those prominent warning labels similar to what we have on tobacco. So I think that's also giving consumers pause on the amount of drinking. So I think if you're in this industry, you need to be proactive and get ahead of things by offering alternative products and perhaps lowering that that alcohol percentage.
Yeah, no, and I think we see that, and in some instances, I think you find that the UK and Europe is ahead, and some instances behind. I think there's an acceptance of the notion sitting all over this, that you wouldn't start from here, a situation where certain products are prohibited. So you're thinking of cannabis and some of those, and alcohol's on free vend. You wouldn't start with that, because if you had to classify alcohol again, you'd be putting it on one of those Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3. So you're getting that moving through the health industry, that's saying, look, this is actually something that's quite dangerous. It does, and the whole notion of addiction is going from something that was slightly shunned, and it was all about the individual and seen as a weakness, to something that's being seen as a mental health disorder, and therefore something that needs treatable. So in that context, people are a lot more sympathetic to the individual, and that's having, I think, a read across where people, the younger generations, if you like, are getting it much more acceptable just to not drink, and they're getting their kicks, but they're getting them elsewhere. And they're going therefore to those list of prescribed products on 1, 2, and 3 on the schedule. So you're seeing a little bit more of the prescribed products being used and less alcohol, which is interesting. So that's having a knock-on effect in the numbers. So the total calories consumed through alcohol is dropping. I saw some Walmart numbers saying that total alcohol calories in North America was down by about 6%. And here, this market of low and no is really roaring. So you've seen the emergence of what we call the botanical segment. So if you think about a gin, all the sort of gin notes and the botanicals in the gin, well, it's exactly the same as that. Exactly the same usage and occasion. As you're in a posh bar, you're out with friends, the set and the setting is identical, except there's no alcohol in the product. And you're getting a buzz from the different mix of the botanicals. You're seeing a sort of nootropic segment emerging and coming out from slightly medicalized internet sales, slightly kooky, getting mainstream now, where people are including certain mainstream nootropics to kind of give people that effect. And again, this is demographically working its way through the system, that you have these kind of occasional drinkers. Really, the Gen Zs have a sort of broadly take it or leave it approach to alcohol, which certainly the Generation X and the Boomers never had. It was very much sort of wired into the system. So that sort of norm of where alcohol is something you might do, you might not do, is working its way entirely through the system. And then if you look at, clearly the two things you need for a trend is you need mental availability allied to physical availability. Well, actually, the low and no segment in Europe now is getting both. I think the UK is ahead. We're actually seeing it in our pubs. Our pubs are the backbones of our high streets and our small villages and towns, and they're really struggling because they're not getting the footfall. And when they get the footfall, everybody's having a fruit juice or a cup of tea. They're not buying the pints and the things that make the pubs the money. And we're seeing that in the supermarkets as well, that the selections, it might have been 2% of the wine fixture was dedicated to alcohol free. It's now about 20-25%, and with kind of low and no both having a distinct shopper base. So I think in the early part of the market, people sort of conflated no alcohol and low alcohol and said, well, it's sort of the same, isn't it? It's sort of not standard. Well, actually, no, they're really quite different. Low alcohol is much more that sort of flexitarian dabbler from if you like, standard drinking, whereas no is just a younger shopper or somebody going, agnostic. And we don't use the word teetotal anymore because it's become so normalized. People just not to drink and not particularly to think about it as well. So you can look at some of the stats there where actually people have a fairly blasé attitude to alcohol or no alcohol. And that social acceptance point, I think, is probably the killer one, really, in that there is no stigma attached to not drinking alcohol. There really isn't. And I think the future of that, going back to sort of semaglutide, where you're just not getting as much pleasure for it, is how can food and drink manufacturers particularly engineer products and stacks within these products that give people a lot of the pop and sparkle that they would get from alcohol, but without the alcohol. So I think that's the challenge that I think this category's got, and who knows where it'll end. But it's a really interesting shift, and certainly one that few actually saw coming. I think that's probably, of all these trends, this is the one that sort of caught people a little bit unawares, I think.
Okay, well, we're almost there.
Fantastic. Look at that 8 seconds to go. You guys nailed it. That's fantastic. I mean, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you both so much. As you can see on the screen now, there is a QR link to the full Nourish Trend report. What we will do is send an overview of what everything has been discussed today out to everyone who has registered and who has attended. So all that information will be in there with contact details. We potentially, I know we're just running to time now, but we have got a couple of questions. So goodbye to anyone who does need to leave us, and thank you so much for attending. But if anyone wants to hang on for a minute, then I'll ask a couple of questions, and then if anyone wants to send more through, then we'll answer them afterwards, won't we? But the first question goes all the way back to our first trend, actually. Which was around the pharmacists and that kind of link between the kind of the pharmacy, the DNA. And it's a question that comes from Linda. And she says, in Ontario, we recently saw pharmacists, many of whom in grocery locations, given the ability to prescribe meds for certain conditions. Might this be the catalyst of sorts to bring together food medicine, as pharmacists have a unique perspective on one's health, prescription history, OTC products, supplements? So really interesting question. Joanne, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And we've been asking that question ourselves for a while, because I don't know if you know, but our biggest grocer in Canada is Loblaw, and they purchased Shoppers Drug Mart, our biggest pharmacy, some years ago, and they've never really integrated the two. We see some Loblaw's products there, but they've never really, what I think is, taken the real the opportunity that they have with that. And yes, our pharmacists can do more now. They're in most locations. They're in Costco's, they're in Walmart's, they're everywhere. And, they do have that whole view. And I think if you couple that with online grocery shopping as well, where you're able to really, make choices even easier than walking through the aisles. A pharmacist can give you some recommendations. We know that's always very powerful. If you're given advice from a medical practitioner, that always, is much higher than any other expert. So yeah, I do think there's going to be real power, and we're going to see that coming together.
Yeah, fantastic. Hamish, anything to add from this side of the borders?
I'd say from a European perspective, the pharmacy channel is complicated. There are different legislation in different European countries, highly regulated and lesser so. I think this pharmacy and retail entanglement is something we're very used to, but they are kept quite separate within the level of the individual retail enterprise. And again, I wouldn't say any particular retailer has really cracked it. That market is moving online a lot in Europe and the UK as well, where consumers are sort of self-certifying, tick list of questions, yes, no, send a photo of the affected area, the person, and then your meds come in the post. So the actual pharmacist is still doing the work, but increasingly in a big sort of windowless shed and reacting to online scripts effectively. So the delivery of that service is changing, which fits a bit less with the retail model, actually, where you walk in and your cross-sold products. But I think it does, if you're doing that, the ability to feed a data stream in and personalize it's there, isn't it? So interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. We then had a question about, which came up on the halal side. So Hamish, you talked about brands recognizing that actually going for halal certification actually opens many, many doors, and it's a really good kind of benchmark to be at. So the question here was, lots of brands are seeing it as a mark of quality. Are there any categories who don't appear to have tapped into it yet?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do. I mean, we talked about, I think it's very prevalent in soft drinks, and it's very prevalent in those sort of discretionary products. I've seen less of it in, recipe dishes, convenience food, ready meals, really. I've seen it in certain channels certain ethnic channels, I see that, but I don't see it in kind of composite goods. And I get it, it's more complicated. If your recipe dish has got sort of 10 ingredients, then it's harder to police than if it's just sweetened condensed milk, or if it's just a carbonated soft drink. I completely understand it. But I think that need is there in mainstream retail for halal to extend its certification to these more everyday products, rather than the traditional sort of standalone single raw material product, if I could describe it as that. So
Mm.
I think the more processed and complicated a product format is, and you don't get more complicated than a ready meal, may have 20 ingredients, then the less halal has reached it, is what I would say. So I would like to see halal certification extend more to those value-added, complicated composite foods, which tend to be more convenience orientated.
Yeah. And Joanne, anything further from you on that?
With halal, I mean, we always tell our clients, like, they're not looking for another butter chicken, right? They want what, their neighbors are eating. And so, pizza is, to your point, frozen pizza, huge category here. Do we see anything with, halal certification? No. Like, thinking about those kind of products, not just, that halal traditional, looking at it in that traditional way.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, you two. It's been really, really interesting. And thank you everyone for attending. I think we'll leave it there because we've taken up their time. But as I said, if anyone wants to send a question to any of us, you'll receive all the contact details afterwards, and come back to us. Thank you for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.